Hello again, it's Simon, and tonight we begin a new journey. A story of travel, discovery, and the unexpected twists that come with exploring the unknown. This chapter starts in Berlin, a city rich with history and full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Before we begin, let's take a moment to settle. Feel the surface beneath you, supporting you gently. Let your hands rest softly at your sides. Take a slow, deep breath in and out. In and out. In and out. In and out. Releasing the tension from your day. Now, let's begin. Simon leaned against the window of the plane, watching the patchwork of clouds drift lazily beneath them. The faint hum of the engines filled the cabin, and beside him, Marie sat with her arms crossed, staring out the opposite window. They hadn't spoken for the last half hour. "You're really going to sit there and sulk the whole flight?" Simon asked, his voice low but tinged with frustration. Marie turned slightly, her expression cool. "I'm not sulking, I just don't want to argue anymore." Simon sighed, running a hand through his hair. The tension between them had started earlier that morning. Something small and insignificant, but it had snowballed into an argument that neither seemed willing to let go of. As the plane began its descent into Berlin, Simon glanced at Marie. "Look, can we just enjoy this trip? Berlin's supposed to be amazing, and I don't want us to ruin it before we even get there." Marie didn't respond immediately, but after a moment she nodded slightly. "Fine, let's just get through today." The streets of Berlin buzzed with life, the air crisp and filled with the sounds of distant laughter and music. Simon walked a few steps behind Marie as they wandered through the city centre, neither saying much. They stopped outside a cafe where Marie finally turned to Simon. "I think I'm just going to take some time for myself," she said, her tone measured. "You can go explore or do whatever you want. I'll meet you back at the hotel later." Simon nodded, a part of him relieved to have some space. "Sure, I'll check out some shops or something." Marie walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and Simon found himself alone in the bustling streets of Berlin. He wandered aimlessly for a while, taking in the sights and sounds, until something caught his eye. A small shop nestled between two towering buildings. Its sign was faded. The lettering in German script so old it was barely legible. The windows were cluttered with strange artifacts, old books, rusted tools, and faded photographs. Something about it felt different, almost magnetic. Simon stepped closer, peering through the glass. His reflection overlapped with the objects inside, and for a moment it seemed like the faint outline of another figure stood behind him. He turned quickly, but the street was empty. "Weird," he muttered to himself before pushing the door open. The shop was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with objects from another time: helmets, uniforms, medals, and photographs from World War II. The floorboards creaked under Simon's feet as he walked slowly through the aisles, his eyes scanning the collection. A photograph caught his attention, a black and white image of a group of soldiers standing in formation. Their faces were sharp, their eyes intense. One of them looked eerily familiar, though Simon couldn't place why. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the frame. The moment he touched it, a faint hum filled the air. Simon froze, glancing around the shop, but nothing seemed out of place. He shook his head, pulling his hand back, but the hum grew louder. The photograph began to glow faintly, the light spreading from the frame to his hand. Simon tried to step back, but it was as if the air around him thickened, holding him in place. The world around him blurred, the shelves and walls dissolving into streaks of light. The hum grew into a roar, and Simon felt himself being pulled forward, as though the photograph itself had swallowed him whole. When the light finally faded, Simon found himself standing in the middle of a street. But it wasn't the Berlin he had just left. The buildings were older, their facades weathered and darkened by time. The air was colder, carrying the faint scent of smoke and distant gunfire. And the people, they were dressed in uniforms, their movements quick and purposeful. A German soldier passed by, his rifle slung over his shoulder. And Simon realized he was no longer in his own time. He glanced down at his hands, the photograph still clutched tightly in his grip. But it was no longer glowing. "This can't be real," he whispered, his breath visible in the icy air. But as the sound of an approaching vehicle grew louder, Simon knew it was very real. For now, we'll pause here. This is the end of episode 1. But Simon's journey into the past has just begun. Imagine the cold air, the distant sounds of an unfamiliar time, and the questions that swirl in Simon's mind. Breathe deeply, let the calm settle over you. Good night.